Hello, everyone. Hope you are having an amazing day. Welcome to In Colour, hosted by myself, Hamish Hallett, where I interview individuals from a variety of professions to get to know these people on a more personal level. For this episode, I've been joined by the one and only Ishaan Shah. He is an anti-slavery activist, an official member of the London Youth Assembly. He was accepted as United Nations Women UK Delegate for the United Nations 65th Commission on the Status of Women. He is also part of the Youth 7 UK Ambassador to the G7 2021 Summit. He has also given a TEDx talk. He's also now the founder of Stolen Dreams, which is a human rights organization that engages with youth, civil society, and government ministers internationally. And this organization has won numerous awards and has been featured in various platforms and events. So it's been a massive pleasure to have Ishaan on. But what we really want to understand Ishaan on the more personal level and away from what he does, we really want to understand like what got him behind his work. Like, why did he do what he's doing right now? Like, what influenced him and what has he learnt the most from? Like, who has he learnt from the most in that sense? So let's bring Ishaan on. First of all, just want to say massive thank you for coming on to In Colour. Hope you are doing well. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Absolute pleasure. So what influenced you? Let's like kind of go back to the start then of your journey then. So like what influenced you then to become an anti-slavery activist then?
Yeah, that's a great question. So from birth, really, my family has brought me up following the faith of Jainism. And that religion really revolves around service to others and non-violence. And so from a very young age, I've always been taught to give back to the community. And so most Christmases since 2013, my family has been taking me to India, to the slums there in Gujarat. And we go into the slums, we teach the kids there, we spend time with them and we eat with them and play with them. So from a very young age, I've been exposed to mass poverty firsthand. And it's one thing, reading about it on a paper or in the news, but it's another thing actually being there and sitting with and eating with and spending time with these kids. And these children are the happiest children I've ever met in my life. And you sort of realize, and it helps you contextualize how privileged we are to live this lifestyle, to have 3 meals a day, a roof over our head, and access to basic sanitation and an education. And then it was in 2016 that I found out that slavery still existed. I learned about the transatlantic slave trade, but I didn't realize that it was still existing today, and that it was existing closer than we think, in the clothes we wear, the foods we eat, and potentially even on my high street. And even the device that I'm recording this on today, it was probably produced using some form of exploitation. And at the time, we were doing a project at school, and I thought, the kids that I've met in India are living in mass poverty. They're at risk of being exploited. I have the privilege, I have the resources to do something more than just an essay and hand it in and get a mark. So let me, for this project, do something with a more lasting impact. And that's when I saw that there was a gap between young people and the issue of modern slavery and human trafficking. The information that's out there on the internet was very complex to understand. I was only 13 at the time, and I didn't even know what a supply chain was, for example. So I had to ask my teachers and my parents, can you help me understand what supply chain slavery is? What is sex trafficking? What does that all entail? And there was this real gap. The movement, the anti-slavery movement, it wasn't utilizing the power and the sort of intellectual capacity and the curiosity of our generation. And that's when Stolen Dreams was founded, acting as a bridge between young people and this issue.
That sounds so interesting. It's the fact that what makes you so remarkable as well, like from like doing a bit of research into you, which sounds a bit of a weird thing to say, but what I mean by having a little look in terms of what you do, and it's the fact like you've done this at such a young age as well. That's something like incredible, and it seems like you're so you're so interested in learning the world so much and stuff. Like, where has that curiosity come from? Does that come from your parents? Does it come from like external influence? Like, where's that curiosity come from in that sense?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure where sort of it started, but I've always been a curious child. When I was younger, I used to have a fascination for wildlife, for example. So I was always reading up about different species, and in particular marine mammals. So like all the different whales and dolphins and porpoises. I just used to love reading about that. And I think when the issue of modern slavery, when I first found out about it, I was curious, because this is an issue that's not spoken about a lot. We don't see it in mainstream media. It's not on the political agenda. It's certainly not being taken seriously or tackled enough at an international level. And there was nothing for young people to understand. So I think I was curious. I was curious to learn more. I was curious to see how how we as young people, we are very much, taking a lot of space in the climate change movement and in the gender equality movement, but we're not present in this movement, and the intersectionalities aren't being recognized. So like climate change, for example, and gender inequality are exacerbating the rates of human trafficking. And I was curious to learn more. I was, very interested at the time in protecting the oceans, and that's when I sort of fell into learning about slavery at sea. And I think, it's just been a very curious child, and that sort of came across in the way that I started my activism journey.
Interesting, fair enough. And what was actually, because you spoke about your activism journey, when did your activism journey start, would you say? Like in terms of like what point would you say, if you can remember it?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And I think it depends how you or I would define activism and what it really means. But I think activism is the way you lead your life and the way you're, giving back to the community. And I think I've been very fortunate enough to have the parents who have exposed me to this at a very young age. So whether that's, walking down the street in London and, seeing a homeless person and sitting with them and talking to them and buying them a meal, for example, that's a simple act of activism. So I think these random acts of kindness that I've been carrying out, every day for as long as I can remember, have really contributed and shaped the person I am today, and allowed me to do things that are on a bit of a bigger scale, I guess, in terms of tackling modern day human trafficking at a more international, national level.
That sounds so interesting, the fact that, because especially I agree with you in the sense of how do you define activism? Because I think activism is it's very difficult to define, because it is like my definition of activism could be completely different to yours, 100%. And you speak a lot as well about your parents and things like that in terms of who you learned the most from. Would you say your parents are one of the biggest people who you've learned the most from, or is there other people that you've kind of learned from in regards to your work or your journey as well, in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm learning at speed and new things every day. And I think that's one of the things I love about activism is that, every day I'm challenging my own views, I'm unlearning and relearning things. So for example, I just recently read a book by Emily Kenway called The Truth About Modern Slavery. And that challenges the current abolitionist movement. And actually it's made me rethink how I'm viewing the issue of modern slavery and human trafficking. But yeah, as you said, the way I learn and the influence is much closer to home. I'm learning from my family, my grandparents, my parents, my younger sister. And even when I go into schools and I teach kids that, I've never met before about modern slavery and human trafficking, I'm learning from them too. And, it is so enjoyable to be able to learn and grow alongside so many other young people at the same time.
100%. And it's nice to hear like people wanting to learn more, because I find in this day and age we're very much, because at Common Sense we're trying to like get rid of echo chambers and to say to people you are able to learn. You don't have to say you don't know everything. It's great to hear, like, for example, from yourself, that you're someone who is willing to learn new things even if you disagree with it. I think that's so like refreshing to hear, definitely. And it's where has that come from then? It's like, are you someone who like why are you so like, I know this is going to sound like a bit of a weird question, but like why are you so open-minded in that sense? Because of the fact you're so willing to learn new things.
Again, I think it comes partly from my upbringing, and the faith of Jainism that we've been brought up with is all about tolerance. It's always about listening first and being empathetic and being compassionate and understanding that everybody's coming from different places. And so from a very young age, I've always been taught to have an open mind, to live with an open mind, to listen, to learn, and to really appreciate how everybody's got different views and everybody will have different inputs. And that's something that I learned, very early on in my activism journey, especially in the anti-slavery movement. There's a lot of divides between how we're going to tackle sex trafficking, whether we legalize sex work, for example, or criminalize it completely. There are a lot of divisions about that, and it's about sort of being tolerant. It's about accepting other people's viewpoints. But I also think partly it came from my understanding and my relationship with this concept of failure. And I think a lot of young people today are quite scared to fail. There's a lot of pressure on us to succeed and do well, and comparing yourself to others constantly. And I think one of the things that I had to learn early on was that I'm going to make mistakes. I'm human. I'm not perfect. This issue of modern slavery is so complex. It's so broad. I was only 13 years old at the time. I'm bound to make mistakes. I'm bound to slip up. I'm bound to be judged as well for speaking out about this at such a young age. And I really had to understand that it's okay to fail. It's okay to be imperfect. And actually, it did take me a while to come to terms with that. But once I did, it made learning so much more fun for me, because, you know, I wasn't afraid of failing. I wasn't afraid of getting something wrong, and helped me to challenge other people and myself more, and broaden my knowledge about this issue and its intersections with the other issues too.
100%. I have like two questions in my head, because that sounds, the idea of failure is something I completely agree with you in that sense. It's like, we don't want to fail for some reason. So like my first question is, when was your last mistake or last failure in quotation marks that you had experienced? And also, because the second thing I want to kind of ask you is, you said like it took you a very long time to kind of get over that barrier of like being able to fail and stuff. How was the process like actually realizing it's okay to like fail, or it's okay to actually like make a mistake in that sense? If that kind of makes sense at all.
Yeah, that does. So one of my biggest failures, I guess, has been how I saw the anti-slavery movement. So I thought it was a very, you know, new concept. You know, modern slavery is very new. I didn't realize that the term has been highly politicized until quite recently, so maybe a couple of months ago, after I read the book by Emily Kenway, actually. And all the work that I've been doing, all the content I've been publishing, for example, was all around how modern slavery is this sort of heinous issue. It's very new, and, you know, it needs to be tackled. But actually what I didn't realize was that these exploitative practices have been existing since the abolition of slavery back in 1833, and how actually our economic systems, our governments are all profiting off of the exploitation of human beings. And that made me change my narrative completely. Another failure I made was I always used to refer to survivors of slavery as victims. And I didn't realize or understand or appreciate that actually, you know, you got to use survivor first terminology, and you've got to use people first language. And again, I had to change my content. I had to learn about how, you know, what survivors go through, for example, and see from, you know, listen to their perspectives and listen to how they want us to refer to them. So that's just another example as well. And I was young at the time, so I was, you know, always learning these things. But I think, you know, in relation to your second question, how did it feel? It felt uncomfortable. I felt embarrassed when I failed. There was an element of shame involved as well. And I almost had to, at times, force myself to fail. And I had to force myself to really feel and sit in those emotions that came with failure, that embarrassment, that shame, that anxiety as well. And I always had to rewire my body to tell myself that those feelings are imposed on you by society, by pressure that you're feeling from other people, and by the fact that you're constantly thinking about, you know, what is this person thinking about the speech that I've just done, or what is this person thinking about the post that I've done. I had to really tell myself that you're doing this activism not for you or not for personal gain, but it's for the, you know, the 45 million plus people who are trapped in exploitation globally. This issue is bigger than you. Your activism is bigger than you, and also that I'm not alone in feeling this way either. There are hundreds, if not millions, of activists out there who are feeling the same way, who are feeling this anxiety and this constant pressure. And that is why, you know, over the years, over the past 5 years, really, I've developed this little community of youth activists. And, you know, we talk, we share our frustrations, our anger, our anxieties together. And the beauty of activism is that collective community in which we can, you know, correct each other, we can hold each other accountable, we can tell each other when we've made mistakes. And ultimately we grow together as a result, which is a truly beautiful and wonderful process in itself.
Truly, absolutely, truly. It's the fact, like, in growing with other people that have the same mission is something massively inspiring. And you've talked about pressure, actually, and that's actually one of the things I really wanted to ask you, actually. You have, is in the sense of, like, with your sense of pressure that you've had, is that can that get sometimes very overwhelming? Or do you actually like having that sense of pressure on you in terms of the work that you do, would you say?
Yeah, it does get overwhelming. And I think this is something that I've been battling with recently. Youth at the moment, in many forms of activism and in many of the global issues that we are interested in tackling, are being excluded, we're being silenced, we're being dismissed, and we're being tokenized. So we're invited to speak at high-level events and dialogues, for example. We're given a pat on the back or a high five and told we're doing a good job. But the things we're actually saying and what we actually want to see enacted are not listened to. And that takes a huge toll on our well-being, our physical and mental well-being. And there is this huge sense of pressure as well that, you know, at the rate we're going, exploitation is not going to be tackled, climate change is not going to be tackled. You know, we're seeing every day these adverse effects happening on our planet. You know, people are dying, people are suffering. there is a huge amount of pressure on us, especially because we've got the privilege, we've got access to technology, we've got the resources, you know, to do something about it. We can't just sit here and not do anything. And that's why we, as youth activists, have fallen into activism. It's not really, we don't really have a choice, because this is our future that these adults in decision-making places are toying and playing around with. And it comes with that pressure, it comes with that frustration, it takes a toll on our physical and mental well-being. You know, we are exhausted, we're burnt out at times. We feel deep sadness and deep pain. And that's why, you know, self-care is so important when you're an activist, especially youth activist, because we're in this for the long run. But yeah, that pressure is overwhelming, and that's why it's so useful to have a community of other young people who you can openly talk to, who you trust, who you can be honest with. But yeah, we all face that pressure, and many people face it in different ways. Many people deal with it in different ways as well. But it's a real problem, and it's facilitated by the fact that we are excluded and silenced and tokenized, and things do need to change, and urgently. And that's one of the things that we're working towards as hard as possible.
And you spoke about like self-care, and I think that doesn't actually get, I think in regarding to activism, a lot of people, maybe that kind of side, because this is why we do our show in Color, is to really reflect and showcase the fact that it is a very pressured job, or pressured, I don't want to say job, but more of a pressured role in terms of being an activist, because you are facing, you know, the state in that sense, or you're trying to create movement in terms of an issue to improve the situation. And you talk about kind of like self-care. In what ways do you perform? I don't know if performance is even the right word, but like, how do you exercise self-care in your life in that sense? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this is, again, something that I had to learn very early on, because obviously when you're reading about modern slavery and human trafficking, it's a very complex and heavy topic. There's a lot of content that you need to digest every day. And again, it gets quite overwhelming at times. So I had to provide myself with boundaries. So I had to say, you know, if you're doing 2 hours a day of research, split it up across the day, or you know, don't do any more than you know, past 6 p.m. for example. After 6 p.m. just take some time for yourself. So I had to create these boundaries between my school life, my activism life, and then my personal self-care life, I guess. And one of the ways I do switch off is, you know, if I go for walks, for example, to just clear my head, to get that fresh breath of air, I guess. But also like watching trashy Netflix comedies as well, I think. That I really enjoy doing. But journaling, writing poetry, writing down my thoughts on a piece of paper, spending time with the family, and things like that. Just the simple things that I guess we tend to forget, or tends to slip away from us. You know, in our everyday life, when we're very busy and we're focusing on so many different things.
Absolutely.
Just anything to really, you know, get me away from the screens, get me away from what's going on in the world, and just to take care of myself and understand that, you know, we're in this for the long run, and I can't help others unless I'm taking care of myself.
Absolutely. It's like the idea of how can you look after someone else's house if you can't look after your own house, in that sense, you know. That's a really interesting. I actually want to ask a question, like, what was the last trashy Netflix series you watched?
It's Convenience on Netflix. I love it.
Oh really? Yeah, that's good.
It's really funny.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. No, I think that's really good to like hear then, because I find, you know, those who are watching or who are listening to this, I think, you know, self-care is so important, especially with any piece of work that you're doing. I think is massively important. And what I do want to like reflect then to this other question, which I'm quite curious to hear your answer to this. Like, how was the process like setting up Stolen Dreams, actually? Because you set this up in March 2017, if I got that correct. And you did this during your school years. So like, yeah, how was the process like setting up Stolen Dreams? And what did you learn from that experience in that sense?
Yeah, so for some background, it was in October 2016 that I first found out that modern slavery still exists. And sort of on the same week, or maybe the week after, I can't remember exactly, but our school told us, you're going to embark on a independent research project over the period of 5-6 months. And you know, you're free to pick any topic you like, and you can present it in any way you like. And I thought, you know, this is a perfect opportunity. And you know, I'd seen the gaps between how, you know, the information out there is not accessible for young people about modern slavery and human trafficking. And I thought, this is the perfect opportunity for me to do more than just an essay and get a mark. Let me do something with a lasting impact. And I thought, young people now, well, then young people, and even today actually, are always online. So let me create a website that really, makes this information digestible for young people. And so I started to research, and that whole process from October 2016 to March 2017 was a very long process. It was very overwhelming at times. It was quite heavy, and there was, again, a lot of pressure on me because obviously tight deadlines, and I was juggling that along with school as well. So it was all happening at once. But I learned a lot from that experience. And I think one of the things that I had to do was, again, I had to go through all of these websites and research documents, hundreds of pages, and I had to understand myself what was being said before I could rewrite it all in a way that young people could understand it. And I was constantly having to write a draft and then giving it to a cousin or my younger sister, for example, or a friend at school, and saying, do you really understand this? What parts of this do you not understand? And they had to rewrite the parts that they didn't understand. I had to go to my teachers and to my parents with these documents and say, can you help me understand what this word means or what this paragraph means? I don't understand it completely. So that was one of the things that I had to do. And the other thing was then actually coding the website. And I am not a tech person at all. So
Me too. I understand it. Yeah.
So that was really tough. But I had the support of my uncle who lives down the road from me, actually. And he taught me how to code a website in WordPress, what I was meant to do, how to make it accessible and easy to use. And again, I had to learn the personal boundaries as well. Where do I stop my activism? Where do I start my self-care? How am I feeling today on a day-to-day basis? Am I feeling too overwhelmed? Am I feeling a bit sad today? Am I feeling frustrated? What do I need to do to ensure that I'm taking care of myself, to ensure that I can see this project out through the end? So yeah, there were a lot of challenges, a lot of obstacles, but it was a fascinating journey, I guess. And I did enjoy setting up Stolen Dreams. And well, it has continued, and it's grown to be an international platform now, which I'm very proud of. And the impact we're having is small scale, but it's there, and it's a start.
Definitely. And that's like, yeah, that's a really good way. The fact that you've said, no, you're absolutely proud. And I mean, I would absolutely be proud. The fact, like, because I've looked at your website, it looks amazing, especially the work that you're doing is incredible. So like from that, then it's like, what has been the most proudest moment that you felt with Stolen Dreams? And you've also spoken a little bit about like obstacles. What's also been the biggest obstacle as well with Stolen Dreams, do you feel?
Yeah, I think the biggest obstacle, which is something that has been sort of brought to light a bit more for me recently, as well, is this exclusion of youth within space and this tokenization of youth. It's frustrating. It's not what we want. We're not being resourced properly. We're not being paid to do activism. We're not being, funded. We're not being included in the spaces where decisions about our futures and decisions that affect us are actually being made. And we're not being consulted either at all. And even if we are consulted, our recommendations aren't implemented. They're just scrapped, or they're acknowledged and then scrapped. So
that's annoying. That's so annoying.
It's frustrating. We get angry. We get burnt out. We work for hours on end. Recently, I was taking part in the United Nations Women's Generation Equality Forum. And the issue of tackling modern slavery and human trafficking was completely excluded from their agendas and blueprints. And one of the things that myself and two other people did was we created the Youth Against Slavery Manifesto, and we spent hours, working until 3 or 4 in the morning on this manifesto, consulting youth from all around the world, just to try and get our demands to tackle modern slavery and trafficking heard. And that takes a toll physically, emotionally, and it's really, really overwhelming at times. And there's a lot of pressure on us to keep doing this. And there were times where we would be on Zoom calls together, we would be crying, and we would be just like so frustrated, so burnt out. We didn't know what to do. There's nobody there to support us. There's nobody we could reach out to. And things really have to change, because we're not the only ones feeling this way. There are so many youth activists out there who are tokenized every single day, who are dismissed and silenced by the UN, by the governments, by places or people who hold that decision-making power, I guess. And so I think that's been the biggest obstacle, and something that youth activists collectively now are working together to try and change. Because we don't wish this upon any other coming up youth activists. We don't want the next generation of activists to feel the way that we felt and to encounter the barriers that we've encountered. It's not right, it's painful, and it's a horrible experience. I think there's this glamour around activism, I guess, today, especially with the rise of social media, that people think, you know, activism is easy, it's fun, it's a trend. It's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot of toil and pain involved. But hopefully we'll see a world where these barriers are no longer existing. But I think, again, one of the moments that I'm proud of and something that gives me hope and keeps me motivated and keeps me doing the things that I'm doing is when I go into schools and I teach kids about modern slavery and human trafficking. I've spoken to children aged 7 about this issue, and I've explained to them, you know, what it means to be in slavery, you know, about concepts like freedom, which we often take for granted and we don't often reflect upon. And when I tell them, you know, your favorite chocolate bar, for example, made by Cadbury is probably produced using slavery or child labor. And this is a 7-year-old I'm talking to, and you see the shock first in their eyes about how slavery still exists, and then you see their determination and drive to act. And I'll get letters and emails and messages from parents and teachers saying, you know, my child came home today and they said, you know, we've got to stop buying from Cadbury's, or we've got to buy secondhand now, or they've written to their government, or they're pitching me solutions, these 7-year-olds, about how we need a global police force that tells countries off whether they're using slavery.
That's amazing. Wow.
It is. It's amazing, and it's fascinating to see how, you know, from such a young age, these kids are thinking and trying to solve such a complex and deeply rooted issue. And it's inspiring to see that, and it keeps me doing what I do.
That's because that was one of the things I thought about in my head when you were saying all those challenges. The fact that you were crying on Zoom calls, talking about these issues and not getting hurt, and then you have those kind of stories where you're inspiring the younger generation. That must keep you going. It must. I mean, that's incredible.
It allows us to hang on to that hope, right? And that's absolutely so important. We can't. You know, again, it's part of the self-care. It is knowing that there is hope, knowing that there is a way forward. And that collectively together, working, you know, hand in hand, standing in solidarity with each other is the only way that we all move forward.
Absolutely. I mean, God, that's incredible. Honestly, I think all of us have a platform to do that, really. I think that's, you know, it's incredible to see that you telling that story. It's incredible, especially the point about activism, especially within social media now. You've got like infographics coming along, and like, don't get me wrong, infographics are, not to go too political on this, but I think, you know, infographics are amazing, but it doesn't go behind the scenes, what you've said in this conversation so far, behind the scenes, the tough work within activism. And I think it's really important, like with our show right now, is to really highlight that kind of backstory and how it is so difficult. And what I really want to understand a little bit more about you, though, is, are there kind of certain perceptions that people have of you that you kind of like dislike, in terms of like, because I feel like maybe not to put words in your mouth, but because you're quite young, would you say that comes into effect quite a lot when people talk about you? Is that one of the perceptions, or is that others in that sense?
There are a few perceptions that I don't like, and I think, you know, a few of them apply to activism in general. And one of them is that, you know, on social media, or when I'm doing public speaking, for example, I come across quite confident, and I come across as an expert as such, but I'm not. I'm not an expert.
How come you don't want to say you're an expert? Sorry to interrupt.
Because I'm learning new things every day. The issue of slavery and human trafficking has been around for centuries, and, you know, there are professors and academics who have been studying this issue for decades. And I only first found about it 4 years ago, and really I've only fully started to understand it in a more in-depth way in the past year or so. So I'm by no means an expert. I don't know all the solutions or all the facts or statistics. And, you know, there are so many incredible organizations and people who have been in this field for decades, who have been studying, researching, you know, going to these countries, going on the ground and working with survivors or those people who are vulnerable and marginalized groups. And every day I'm learning new things. So I'm by no means an expert, and I'm not this perfect, confident public speaker that comes across, you know, when I'm, I guess, you know, doing public speaking or doing Instagram lives, for example, or on videos on social media. You know, there's a lot of hard work involved. There's a lot of anxiety that comes along with it.
Yeah.
I get incredibly nervous. You know, my right leg always starts wobbling uncontrollably when I'm doing public speaking. It's just one of the things that I realize.
Really?
Yeah. But these are things that don't come across, I guess. And again, it's also the fact that people think, you know, that I'm never getting things wrong, but I'm always getting things wrong. You know, whether it's a little typo or I got a wrong fact, for example. You know, and it's this constant process of learning and growing, I guess. So yeah, that's probably one of the main perceptions that people have of me that I really don't like, because I don't like to be, you know, I don't even like to be held up as a leader in this field either, because, you know, there are so many survivors of exploitation, and so many amazing people within this movement who are doing so much more than me. But I also want people to understand as well that you don't have to do something internationally or even nationally to be an activist. It all starts on a very local, at the home type level, and we've seen that with sort of the movement for climate action. Many of the steps that people are taking are in the house. Switching to a bamboo toothbrush, for example, or using less water. The same thing applies to tackling modern slavery and human trafficking. We can start buying secondhand. We can write to our governments, and that all starts from the home, really.
That's such a good message, though. Like, really, really good message. It's interesting that you say that's in terms of like you thinking other people think you're really confident, but you're actually not. I think that's really interesting. I do resonate with that a lot, because I think a lot of people, you look at like these top speakers or top activists or top anyone, and you're thinking, how on earth have they got there? How, they probably know it all. They absolutely don't. And I think that's really, and it's good that you've kind of opened that up, because I find people do think people know it all, but actually maybe they don't. I think that's really interesting. Is there anything else, would you say, that people get wrong about you, would you say?
I think it may come across that I'm doing this alone as well. Like, that everything I'm doing is alone. But I think one of the things that I'm so grateful for, and that people have to understand as well, is that everything I do, that there is a whole community behind me who is helping me. So whether that's posting something on Instagram, the research that I get that from, there is a whole research team who are working on that one document, and this is very much a collective effort. Activism isn't a competition. It's not about who can get the most followers on Instagram, who can get the most international attention. It's about that sense of community and collaboration, and understanding that we're all in this together and we're all working to a collective goal. And that the only way that we can reach these targets is by standing together and not doing this alone, but doing this collectively as a community.
You know what? That's a really good way to end this interview. I think it's been a massive pleasure, like, speaking to you, Ishaan.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. No, it's absolutely been a massive pleasure. And this is just your chance to, where can our listeners at Common Sense find Stolen Dreams? And you can just plug away your socials as well.
Yes, I'm most active on Instagram at Twitter at _Ishaan Shah, and you can find my website stolendreams.co.uk.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone who's been listening to this has enjoyed this interview with Ishaan Shah. If this is your first time listening to Common Sense, like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. And also, if you're feeling extra lucky, why don't you join Common Sense at jointcsnetwork.co.uk. And until the next interview, the next time I interview an amazing person from another industry, stay in colour.